Imagine finding out that just stepping through a set of public gates could instantly cut the amount of discrimination you face in your daily life by, like, nearly 50%.
Yeah, it sounds completely made up, right? Like social science fiction.
Right. But, I mean, that massive drop in societal prejudice, it's actually happening right now,
Yeah.
just down the road inside our state parks.
It's honestly incredible.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. And if you are joining us as a professional in, outdoor recreation or park management or public policy, this is a special installment.
Yeah, it's part of our Micah's Outside Research Review series tailored specifically for you guys.
Exactly. So today we are taking apart a really remarkably comprehensive 2026 study. It was published in Leisure Sciences, and it's titled Discrimination Experience and Park Visitation of People of Color, the Case of North Carolina State Parks.
And the scope of this project is what makes it so valuable for anyone working in the field right now. The researchers surveyed over 1,600 people of color living in North Carolina.
Wow, 1,600.
Yeah, a massive sample size. And they didn't just ask about, like, camping habits. They sought to understand the daily lived encounters with discrimination that these individuals carry with them.
Right, establishing a baseline.
Exactly. And then they cross-referenced that baseline with how they actually utilize public state parks.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We are extracting the most surprising data from this research to figure out the mechanics behind that 50% drop.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we're going to look at what these findings demand of you as a professional today. Because, I mean, when budgets are tightening and public scrutiny is so high, how do you actively defend and engineer spaces that provide that kind of psychological relief?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge.
Mm.
But to understand the magnitude of what the modern park is achieving, we have to establish the historical baseline first. Because a public park hasn't always been a refuge.
Definitely not.
For decades, the system operated a lot like a country club, with an incredibly strict, legally enforced, members-only sign out front.
Yeah, even though we like to think of public lands as this universal heritage, the reality is that since the mid-19th century, these spaces were largely built by and for affluent, powerful groups.
Right. I mean, look at North Carolina during the Jim Crow era. They enforced a strict, separate but equal segregation policy across their public lands. Out of the entire state system, only 2 parks were open to African Americans.
Just 2.
Just 2. Jones Lake State Park and Crabtree Creek, which we now know as William B. Umstead State Park.
So the foundational infrastructure of the whole system, including that massive expansion during the 1930s and 40s under the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yeah, the CCC.
Right. All of that was built during a time when people of color were systematically barred from enjoying the fruits of those public works.
Exactly.
But, I mean, let me push back for a second. The Civil Rights Act passed in 1964.
Yeah.
The physical barriers, the legal segregation, that was all dismantled over 60 years ago.
Yeah, legally speaking.
Right. Surely we can't blame modern visitation disparities entirely on, half-century-old legislation. There has to be a modern mechanism keeping people away, or at least a modern perception of risk. Because the demographics today are still drastically skewed.
Oh, they're undeniably stark. The study points to nationwide data, like a Minnesota report showing non-white individuals make up only 5% of state park visitors.
5%.
Just 5%, despite being 20% of the state's population. And in this 2026 North Carolina study, where African Americans alone are over 20% of the population, a full 1/3 of the people of color surveyed hadn't visited a single state park in the past 12 months.
1 in 3 haven't gone once. So if it isn't just the ghost of the 1950s keeping them away, what is the modern barrier?
Well, to isolate that, the researchers grounded their study in several highly publicized events where implicit bias intersected with outdoor recreation. They note that the perception of risk in public spaces is continually reinforced by these contemporary incidents.
Right, it's not just history, it's happening now.
Exactly. They point to the tragic 2014 shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice in an Ohio public park following a 911 call based on racial profiling.
Yeah, absolutely devastating.
And they also cite the 2020 incident in New York Central Park, where an African-American bird watcher simply asked a white woman to leash her dog.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and she responded by calling the police to report a threat. So when a space of leisure repeatedly becomes a theater for national news involving life or death profiling, the fundamental identity of that space shifts.
A park goes from being a place of relaxation to an arena where you might literally have to justify your right to exist.
Exactly. The researchers recognize this tension. The historical exclusion combined with these modern publicized risks, and they decided to measure the actual ground-level discrimination people are facing today.
And how do they measure that?
They used a standardized metric called the Everyday Discrimination Scale, or the EDS. It measures the frequency of perceived chronic discrimination, asking respondents, how often they're treated with less respect, receive poorer service at restaurants, or are called names and insulted.
The baseline data they uncovered for everyday life in North Carolina is heavy. I mean, nearly 90% of the respondents reported experiencing some form of discrimination in their daily routines over the preceding 12 months.
90%.
Yeah, mostly based on race, gender, and ancestry. That is a chronic, pervasive level of stress that individuals are navigating every single day on their commute, in stores, in their neighborhoods.
It represents a massive allostatic load, which is, the cumulative wear and tear on biological systems caused by chronic stress.
Right.
But the core revelation of the study, the real plot twist, emerges when the researchers ask these same individuals to rate their experiences of discrimination specifically inside the boundaries of state parks.
The numbers just plummeted. People of color experienced nearly 50% less discrimination inside state parks compared to their everyday lives.
It's a huge drop.
Yeah, and furthermore, the vast majority of those who did visit reported being very or extremely satisfied with their experiences in those parks. It operates almost like a social force field.
It's a social force field. Yeah, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
You cross the park boundary, and the volume knob on societal prejudice just gets dialed down by half. So why is this happening? Are the trees just making people nicer, or is there an actual mechanical reason for this drop?
Well, the researchers synthesized this force field effect through two main hypotheses. The first is purely environmental. State parks, by design, are expansive.
Right, big open spaces.
Exactly. They feature vast acreage, separated trails, dispersed recreation areas. This physical layout naturally limits interpersonal interaction. You're simply running into fewer strangers than you would in a dense urban environment.
And fewer interactions statistically reduces the opportunity for discriminatory encounters. Physical distancing acts as a buffer. You can't experience poor service if you're eating a sandwich by yourself on a secluded rock outcropping.
Exactly. But the second hypothesis they propose feels much more profound because it deals with the psychology of the space itself.
Yeah, let's get into that.
It centers on the concept of the leisure mindset. State parks are dedicated zones for recreation and relaxation. When visitors enter these spaces, regardless of their demographic background, they are adopting a shared purpose.
Okay.
And the researchers suggest this shared purpose temporarily overwrites our standard social categories, creating what they call a shared group identity.
Oh, that's fascinating. So instead of seeing each other through the lens of race or class, the primary identity becomes like fellow hiker or fellow park visitor.
Yes, exactly. That temporary situational identity fosters more harmonious and tolerant social interactions. It creates a baseline of mutual understanding that simply doesn't exist in a high-stress environment, like a workplace or a crowded grocery store.
The idea that a shared love of a trail can actively suppress societal biases is incredibly optimistic. But we have to tackle the statistical paradox in this study.
The paradox, yeah.
Because the data presents this really counterintuitive twist regarding who is actually experiencing this force field. You would logically assume that the people who face the highest levels of discrimination in their daily lives would be the most withdrawn, right? The ones avoiding public spaces entirely.
Yeah, you would think they'd just stay home. But the data reveals the exact opposite. Individuals who do visit state parks report experiencing significantly more discrimination in their day-to-day lives than the respondents who stay home.
Which is wild. My initial thought was that maybe visiting parks somehow exposed them to more risk. But based on the 50% drop we just talked about, that can't be it.
No, it requires reframing how we view the utility of a park. The researchers hypothesize that individuals enduring the highest levels of systemic daily stress aren't avoiding these spaces. They are actively seeking them out as an oasis.
They are using the park as a vital coping mechanism.
Exactly. The park functions as a necessary refuge. When you are constantly hypervigilant in your daily life, finding a physical location where the volume of prejudice is dependably lowered, it becomes crucial for mental and physical recovery.
So it transforms our understanding of state parks from simple, recreational amenities into actual critical components of public health infrastructure.
Yes. And if we accept that the park acts as this protective bubble, the immediate operational question for managers is understanding exactly who is utilizing this oasis.
Right. Because if you are directing resources or designing outreach, you need the demographic playbook.
And the study provides this through a negative binomial regression analysis.
Oh, heavy stats.
Heavy stats, yeah. But it isolates the specific variables that predict how frequently someone will visit a park. And age emerged as a powerful negative predictor. For every unit increase in a respondent's age category, their predicted number of park visits dropped by over 16%.
I mean, we see mobility issues affecting older demographics in all outdoor recreation data. But given the Jim Crow context we established earlier, this clearly goes beyond, like, bad knees or reluctance to sleep in a tent.
Yeah, the researchers point directly to historical trauma. Older generations of people of color directly experienced institutionalized segregation. The emotional and psychological barrier to entering a space that actively rejected them for the first 30 years of their lives, it remains incredibly high.
That makes total sense.
Conversely, younger generations who are actually driving the current visitation numbers up did not experience that specific legalized exclusion firsthand. They appear less constrained by that historical memory and are more aggressively claiming these public spaces.
So aside from age, the data highlights household income and geography as strong positive predictors.
Yeah.
Higher income and living in densely populated urban ZIP codes lead to more park visits. Since our listeners are industry professionals, we don't really need to rehash the basics of opportunity theory. Everyone working in recreation knows that a free entry park still requires reliable transportation, gas money, specialized gear, and, the luxury of paid time off.
Exactly. The intersection of urban geography and income is the crucial takeaway here. The individuals actively utilizing the park as an oasis are primarily younger, urban populations with the disposable income necessary to overcome the logistical friction of getting out of the city and into the woods.
And that intersection brings us to the operational mandate for professionals. The study proves parks are successfully reducing discrimination by 50%. That is a massive achievement.
Weird.
But 50% less does not mean zero.
No, it doesn't. Celebrating the reduction cannot lead to complacency. The data is explicit. Race, gender, and ancestry remain primary sources of discrimination occurring within park boundaries.
Right.
Professionals cannot trivialize the remaining burden that minoritized groups face in these spaces, the health risks associated with chronic discrimination, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, severe anxiety. They don't simply vanish because the incident happened on a scenic overlook instead of a city sidewalk.
Navigating that remaining 50% is going to be the defining challenge for park managers over the next few years. Because honestly, we are looking at a very grim reality in the current political and economic climate.
Yeah, we really are.
With the recent widely reported large-scale staff terminations and massive budget cuts hitting U.S. public land agencies in 2025 and 2026, the resources traditionally used to defend this inclusive culture are vanishing.
They're disappearing. The loss of interpretive rangers, DEI coordinators, and community outreach staff, it removes the human infrastructure that historically fostered the shared group identity we discussed earlier. When an agency can barely afford to keep the bathrooms clean and the trails cleared, the nuanced work of engineering a welcoming psychological environment often gets categorized as non-essential, and it just gets eliminated.
So how do you mechanically maintain an oasis when your budget has been slashed by a third and your interpretive staff is gone? I mean, if the data tells us that younger urban populations of color are relying on these spaces to escape daily discrimination, how does management structurally support them without the traditional resources?
Well, the strategy has to shift from internal staffing to structural partnerships and decentralized empowerment.
Okay, break that down for me.
First, tackle the logistical friction. If you cannot afford to run your own outreach programs, park systems must partner directly with urban transit authorities to create subsidized direct shuttle routes from urban centers to the park gates.
Oh, wow. So you eliminate the barrier of private vehicle ownership entirely.
Exact.
You essentially bypass opportunity theory by making the transportation public infrastructure rather than a private burden.
Yes. And secondly, you decentralize the interpretive work. Since agencies can no longer afford to staff these roles internally, management must actively empower user-led recreation groups. Organizations like Outdoor Afro, Latino Outdoors, or local urban hiking clubs, they already have the cultural competency and the trust of the community.
Right.
Park managers should be giving these groups priority access, waive group fees, and dedicated spaces to lead their own programming. You allow the community to engineer their own shared group identity within your park.
It's a shift from being a provider of an experience to being a facilitator of space.
Exactly.
And we can also look at how the physical space is designed to encourage that leisure mindset, right?
Yeah.
If shared purpose reduces bias, then the physical architecture of the park should force cooperative or parallel play. Communal fire pits, centralized cooking areas, trail designs that encourage courteous passing. All of that subtly reinforces the idea that everyone is part of the same hiker group.
It relies heavily on signal framing. Even simple changes to signage shifting from punitive rules like do not walk off trail to communal identity-based messaging like we protect our parks by staying on the trail. It can reinforce that necessary shared group identity without requiring a staff member to be present.
That makes total sense.
Mm.
So, to pull all these threads together, we started by looking at a system burdened by a really heavy history of members-only exclusion.
Right.
Yet the 2026 data reveals a profound mechanical evolution. These public lands are now serving as vital health infrastructure, acting as a psychological refuge where the daily grinding volume of societal discrimination is demonstrably cut in half.
It's really incredible to see the numbers confirm it.
Yeah. Younger urban populations are utilizing this force field as a coping mechanism, and the mandate for professionals is to fiercely defend that access through strategic partnerships and community empowerment, even as budgets shrink.
Absolutely. The resilience of these communities in claiming these spaces is remarkable, as is the inherent psychological power of dedicated leisure environments. And I actually want to leave you with one final thought that builds on the mechanics we've uncovered today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We know that the leisure mindset of a state park helps create a shared group identity. We know that shifting someone's primary label from a demographic category to fellow park visitor literally cuts discriminatory behavior by 50%.
Right, it completely changes how we process the people around us.
It does. So the provocative question is whether we can engineer that same psychological phenomenon outside the woods.
Hmm.
If shared purpose suppresses bias so effectively in a state park, how do we mechanically export that leisure mindset into our schools, our neighborhoods, and our workplaces?
Ugh.
Can we systematically build shared identities in our daily environments that mimic the magic of the trailhead?
Taking the social force field out of the park and into the city. That is an incredibly powerful concept to mull over as we look at how spaces shape our behavior.
Yeah, something to really think about.
Well, thank you for joining us